Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to Tool Show with me, Master Dan, the Journeyman shooter. And it's a beautiful morning. We're out here in Inglewood, and we're having a delicious coffee time segment. Caramel drizzle, and we all know why Snoop loves that caramel drizzle. For the drizzle. So, what did I want to talk about this morning? Well, bridges. Bridges are really cool, and I was really hoping they were going to lift this giant crane over here and throw this bridge right out of the way to make way for this new bridge that's coming in the back. They're switching it over. This bridge here, it was damaged during floods in 2013. There was a massive flood in the city, and everything was, you probably heard my stories about how I was robbed, where somebody stole all my tools from work, and that's kind of why the show was really started. It's basically because it realized that I love tools so much at that time, but this bridge was damaged really bad, and this is one of the harder hit areas. So what they ended up having to do is they're going to have to replace it because it's just easier. It's only basically small enough for two cars to get through there anyways, so they need to build up. And it goes towards the zoo from Inglewood, so it kind of connects Calgary's oldest neighborhood to Calgary's coolest zoo, which is, it's our only zoo, so it's not kind of the only thing, but I just don't want to get soaked if one of these waves ends up crashing this way. But it's a beautiful morning. But the problem with this bridge is it's kind of funny. The engineers and everybody put in a lot of time into trying to figure out how much it weighs, what it consists of, how it's gonna lift, and it's this crane was brought in, which is a massive crane. I think they said it's like I forget how many, I don't know what it is. I think it's probably let me take a look there. How much is that? I don't know, probably, I think they said 200 feet, 300 feet up in the air there or whatever, but they don't bring them into the city for these kind of things, but it was easier than tearing it apart. The problem with tearing it apart is there's lead paint all over that thing. So as soon as you start taking apart the bolts and you start taking apart the rivets, that paint's going to chip off and fall into a major drinking supply for the city and all the other cities that go along this river here, which you can't do. You can't drop some lead paint in there. It's going to be horrible. I come from Michigan, where there's Flint's not far from there, and even all the schools across Michigan and the states, look in Ohio, there's a lot of different places, Missouri, all these different states have problems with lead because the pipes used to be made of lead, and it was just it was a cheaper metal, but it was a heavier metal, which kind of made it more solid. I guess that's kind of the easiest way to put it. It was just an easy way for them to do it, and it was a cheap metal, so it was installed in everything. So all those pipes are now corroding, and yeah, you got to be careful, especially if you have lead pipes in your house. You better be ready for some kind of remediation where you're going to have to take those pipes all the way back out to the street and pray that there's no lead pipes that are feeding that place, because yeah, eventually that stuff breaks down. It's just part of what construction is. That's why eventually they need to get more sustainable projects, where nowadays construction is going to last 100 years. Back in the olden days, it used to last maybe 20-30 years, and that's why this bridge right behind me is kind of a marvel. It's 110 years old, I think, or it's over 100 years, and they thought it was only going to last maybe, I think, 50, 70 years max, but it made it over 100 years, and it's actually kind of a piece of history. So that's why they're going to lift it up all in one piece, take it across the river there, and they're going to lay it down over in the river right just on the other side basically, and they're going to start taking it apart, and they're going to save some parts and put it on this new bridge over here, and they're going to make a pretty cool bridge out of it. So it's going to actually still have some of that old history, but sadly they can't make the bridge. It just costs way too much to kind of bring the bridge back to normal, and that's a problem with all across North America, especially the United States. When they started building their road systems, it's been about 70 years now since a lot of these roads have been built, so they're falling apart. I've seen videos, especially on the Detroit news. I watch a lot of the Detroit news because it brings me back home. I see where my mom lives, my dad, everybody, so I can see where the weather's going, how it is there. It kind of brings me back to just being back there. I guess it's a pretty cool thing. Next weekend's the Detroit Indy, which is awesome. I'd love to go back for that, but sadly I'm kind of stuck. So, but that's kind of brings me back to that. There's the crumbling infrastructure, and in the videos on Detroit, every morning there's a giant boulder basically being thrown through windows and hurting people on the highways, because when you're getting up to I think it's 80 miles an hour, 100 kilometers an hour kind of thing, they're gonna fire rocks once they hit those big tires, and they're going through windows and hitting people, and it's extremely dangerous. So that's why they've got to upgrade these things, and a lot of the time they're gonna find it's easier just to tear it all out and start over, because with today's new construction technologies, they're going to build to last for 100 years almost, if not more. And that's why I love being a construction worker, is because you know some of the stuff that you build is going to be there for forever almost. That's one of the ways to live forever. Is it's tough. You're always trying to live forever, but you're going to sadly, all of us are kind of heading towards the end result of the same thing, basically. But if you can find a legacy, if you can find something that's going to live forever, like I know a lot of my work, I've hidden little signatures all over the place, because back home in Detroit, that's what Jack White used to do. And he worked at an upholstery dealership. The lead singer for the White Stripes, Jack White, he was working at an upholstery place where they'd fix couches and all these other crazy things. And he was fixing couches and chairs, and what Jack White would do though is he would hide his CDs inside of these chairs. He'd sign it and he'd put a couple CDs in there. He'd put like I don't know, his album, like whatever. He'd put a whole bunch of different stuff in there, and then he'd hide it in these people's furniture. So if you actually went to one of these stores that Jack White was working at, there's a good chance that there's one of his signed autographed albums that's sitting in there from before he was even famous. So you could be loaded if you have the right piece of furniture, or you could have ruined your classic furniture, which is kind of the thing. You can't be doing that too much because it still is technically graffiti and doing all the other problems that you do with it. But personally, I like to sign a lot of my work. I'll put a little signature where nobody can see it, or something out of the way off to the side, because it's a way to live forever. Somebody's going to find that someday. And I know at a few projects I've even put little like chips where it's like, oh, if you find this, come find me for $2 or for $5, just so that we can kind of talk and find out what the new construction is on the place. Because I always like to hear about what new construction is, and especially the people that are tearing my stuff out, especially if it was hard, because when you do a good job, then it's going to be harder to tear it out. When I was working during the floods that kind of destroyed this area here, it was it's tough, because when we were tearing out all the flooring and all the other crazy stuff, there was problems with that, is because it was installed so well that it's tough to tear it all out of there. You can't tear something out that was installed too well. So that was what took us so long to tear all the floors and all the other stuff out when we're volunteering. But at least we did it, and you had to get it out of there, especially when the flood waters hit that stuff. It's you can't keep it. There's no way, especially with all the stuff that's floating around, the grunge, the diseases, the stuff that was backed up from sewers. You just can't do it. You got to get rid of it. So it was a sad time, but we did it and we got rid of it. But the problem with this bridge though is that it's too heavy. The engineers didn't take in effect that it was too heavy to lift it. So they have a really tight, like there's weather sensors. There's 5 of them, I believe they said, on this one crane alone, that actually measures the wind speed, it measures the temperature, it measures everything basically, or basically like the barometer, like if there's rain, anything that's going on, it's taking that into account, so that when it lifts this bridge up, it's going to be perfect and it's going to be easy. So that's why they had to bring in such a big crane, because they don't usually have these in this part of the city, or even in the city, they were saying, just because it's such a big crane. It's kind of unheard of. But the problem was, is it started to lift it, they had it actually up off the ground, and they realized it weighs more than they were expecting. So there's some kind of added metal in there. There's something that's going on that caused that bridge to, I don't know, to actually weigh a bit more. So they can't lift it again. So now they're going to have to do all their calculations, and it's got to be basically a dry day. There can't be any wind. There can't be anything going on down here. It's got to be basically a beautiful day. So that's what we're hoping for. But they're figuring maybe Monday, maybe Tuesday. Who knows when they're going to get this move. But sadly, that's the thing, is these cranes cost money, and that was always how I was raised. I worked in the oil patch. I worked in construction for a long time, skyscrapers. When they bring in these cranes, those cranes are charged out by the day, and they cost a lot of money. They're not really cheap, especially one that's that big, like a 300-foot crane going on there. Like, man, you know how much one of those costs a day? It's a lot. So if you can think thousands, think a lot higher than that, because it's expensive. There's going to be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, depending on how long it's sitting there for. So make sure you get it right and you do that stuff, especially if you want to be an engineer and not just a construction worker. You better be ready to take the brunt for it, because you guys get the blame. Well, then you guys pass it all down to us, and then the construction workers usually get it. And that's why electricians usually are fixing a lot of stuff that wasn't accounted for in the original blueprint. It's funny, I've seen some engineering blueprints that are just nuts, like how these people make $100 and something thousand a year and drive Mercedes and stuff like that. I don't know. I've seen plugs inside of walls. I've seen plugs like on a door. It's like you can't put a plug on a moving door that's going around unless you really plan that. There are ways to do anything. Nothing's impossible. And just like this bridge, it's going to get moved. They got to get it out of here, and hopefully they don't drop all that lead dust into my drinking water. But that's it for Tool Show. I'm Master Dan, the Journeyman shooter. Get out there, try not to burn any bridges while you're lifting them out of the way and making way for the new bridges. So have a good day and keep safe.